Is everything clear on my end? Am I coming
You
through
sound,
clearly? No echoing or anything
Oh
like that?
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
you're good.
sound great.
Okay.
And that's the first thing that actually like connected. Well, actually, we connected on RedCircle
We
and
did. Yeah,
we did a
last year, I
cross
think.
promotion. And our cross promotion literally lasted like 3 days before it was completed. And that was like 500. Like we switched out, we put 500 of your commercial in ours shows, and it was over in like 3 days. And I still have podcasts that are like playing my my promo because they don't get the listens that you and I do. But then I
Oh, well, that's
listened,
good to know. Yeah, it's a good way to
and
look at it.
you guys have these like voices that are like butter, and I really like audio pong. And so, hey everybody, welcome to Public Access America. My name is Jason. His name is still Jeffrey. We're here with Marco from Audio Pong, and we get together once a week to talk about the week. You can find Audio Pong or Public Access America anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I found Audio Pong on Twitter, so go find them there. And for our disabled listeners, try Victor Reader or use your Audible, your smart device, and ask it to play the latest episode of either show. And I don't know, you might want to switch to Audio Pong this week because the topics might get a little heavy because this has been a real week, guys. But I want to start out by turning people on to Audio Pong in case this gets too heavy. They know where to go. So, Marco? What is Audio Pong all about?
Hi, thanks, Jason and Jeffrey, for having me on.
Mhm.
Audio Pong is an art project, you could say. It started as two guys that just had really great conversations and touched on a lot of topics. And sometimes we'd speak for hours, sober even, which was surprising. And we thought, well, let's just add a microphone to this and see where it goes. And it turned into something that we just really love to do. We used to do it weekly. Now we do it sort of bi-weekly. That way it gives us more of a chance to research a topic. I think we're more into, at least recently, we've been more into like book studies, like book reviews, things like that,
Right.
trying to be able to talk more about a topic that interests us. But that's really all that it is at the moment, at least. It's a foundation for us to do more with and to talk with people, even if it's just ourselves. I feel what's great about radio, podcasting in general, is that it's a conversation sort of
Mhm.
existentially between people around the world.
That's right. And I always think if we can, it's like a dinner table. If people are listening to you, then they're
Mm,
learning how to have conversations without being angry and fighting with each other
right,
because they
right.
hear people just talking. And like, well, I think what you guys do is you offer a little gift or several gifts in the show, but then you open it up and you don't really have to define it to describe it. And I think that's really cool the way you attack things like, is love real? That just stopped me in my tracks. I was like, I never even really thought of that. You know what I mean? So I like the topics you cover. I like the way you non-judgmentally address them. Yeah,
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
definitely. Is there anything on your mind this week? And did this week just conjure up anything?
Well, I was listening to one of your episodes. I think it was your last one, actually. Jeffrey had mentioned Parthenax, and I just wanted to say I love that quote as well. But that's a
Nice.
that's a week out. I should have my own, I guess. Um, Words of wisdom. Um, Something that's always on my mind is mental health. And there's a really interesting psychologist named Guy Winch. I'm not exactly sure which part of the world he's from, but it's somewhere in Europe. You should definitely give a listen to him. And the point that he makes is that we never prioritize our mental health. If we get a scrape, we put a bandage on it. If we break a leg, we see a doctor to fix it. But when it comes to something mentally, we leave it alone, or worse, we attack it, right? Where we become our own enemy. And it could be something
Right.
minute, like how you close that drawer, slam that door. And I guess my top of mind is stress. It relates in the way that everything that we do in life, and I've mentioned this, I don't know how many times, but everything we do is a management of stress, right? Even to the most minute detail or event. And so that's always on my mind. I guess that I'll go with that.
I,
Mhm.
I distract myself from stress. How about you, Jeffrey?
Oh, well, I mean, it just kind of depends for me. Depends on where I'm at. I actually like to bake when I'm stressed.
Mm,
I mean,
Interesting.
it's not necessarily one of the it's not necessarily, one of the, maybe healthiest choices, but it's kind of that, it kind of goes back to that, what can I smell? What can I taste? What can I touch? What can I hear? Just kind of grounding myself is what I'm doing. And
Right.
I never understood that for a lot of years. When I would get super stressed out, I would turn on music and I would start baking. And it turns out it's a grounding technique. I didn't have the words for it because I didn't know what I was doing. But
Right.
as I've come to learn, I'm grounding myself. It's like, getting
Hmm.
out of my own head for a minute and, using, because baking is very much a science, and using that to, make something, smell something, taste something, hear something, feel something, and then come back to whatever it is that has me stressed out. On the downside, because I actually do just enjoy baking, sometimes I'll just be like, I'm gonna make some cookies today. This just sounds great. Debbie walks in, it's like, you okay, buddy? Like,
Uh-huh.
oh
I can
yeah, no,
relate to
I'm
that.
actually fine. I'm actually perfectly fine. I just wanted to make cookies.
Cooking in general is surprisingly um, entertaining, and the problem solving. That's something that I love, is to problem solve, and cooking and baking definitely. I would agree with that. That's a good way to sort of exercise your mental ability, even.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And you do something with your hands when you're in the kitchen that doesn't allow you to be on your phone or the tablet, you know?
That's a good point. Yeah,
And I
Yep.
think
the
that's so
disconnection
cool.
from technology is, I guess, also a top of mind.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been slowly doing that. I mean, being a podcaster and having to promote like the show is one thing, but I've limited where I do that in my exposure to other things and things
Oh,
that I don't
we
approve
struggle
of,
with that.
you
Yeah.
know?
Now we struggle with that quite a bit because Zach and I are both of a similar mind when it comes to using social media. We don't like it. We don't like doing it. So we're really bad used car salesmen about our own content. And
Right.
you made a good point. Actually, I was surprised rather that you mentioned you found us on Twitter. That blows my mind. That is, next to YouTube, the thing we use the least, and something I should improve on.
Um, well, actually, I research politicians, I scientists, and so the first thing I do when I hear a name is go to Twitter, type it in, and because that offers me a link. Like every politician has a link to their office and phone number. It's
Mm.
required on every public profile they have. So I've just learned how to research people, and yeah, that was amazing. So I tweeted you out as a podcast recommendation, and I like that.
Oh, thank you very much for
Mhm.
doing that.
Yeah, no, I like having a group of people that just communicate and then just like swapping perspectives and seeing where that goes, you know? Like you said, last week we had Deja, who was a Latino transgender Democrat in Philadelphia, you know? And it was like, let's bring that perspective in and see where the conversation
That
goes,
was a
you know?
very interesting, yeah, that was a very interesting show to listen to. And I agree. That's actually where I want to take our show next, is to do more of what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Even if it's, repeated, I think it's great. It's very interesting to me.
Oh,
Mhm.
I think we repeat mental health every week, don't we, Jeffrey?
If it doesn't come up every week, I'm honestly surprised. But you think about it, where else do you hear the topic of mental health? And that's a real question for me, because you
Mhm.
don't you don't really talk about it at work unless something comes up. You don't really talk, maybe you talk about it at home. I mean, had to have some very tough conversations around mental health at home this week,
Yeah.
with one of my kids. And that's, Marco, kind of what you said, we've kind of gotten to the point, at least in this house, where, if you need a mental band-aid, we've kind of we've really embraced the idea of taking mental health days, you know,
Good.
because there are some things that come up that just absolutely drain you. They're absolutely difficult. And to not take some time away to either process or, come down from whatever you've had to experience. Like, if you don't take that time, it comes back, it bottles you, you bottle it up, and, you don't deal with it all that well. And so really, I don't really know where else you necessarily have such an open forum about mental health, unless you're going to see, somebody who specializes in mental health.
Well, that's a good point, and I think about that too. I mentioned I've mentioned before, a psychologist and author, Daniel Kahneman, and he talks about that too. That these quietly, this is not verbatim, but he refers to these sort of quiet taboos that we just don't bring up in any philosophical way between strangers and coworkers or even acquaintances, because we're sort of always in a persona that is the idea that, well, we're in a persona that is a commercial for our most likable self, right?
Right.
And serious or negative or philosophical things often conjure a lot of negative thoughts. They require us to be rational or logical, that sort of thing, maybe critical, or even argue and debate, which I actually believe that many people, in my opinion, that I've met and spoken to, aren't ready to properly debate. That's something that I study all the time myself. I
Mhm.
think it should be a class even in public school. I think debating is very important. How to speak to each other makes a big difference.
Agreed.
I mean, civics used to be,
Right.
taught in schools, back in the day. Yeah, it was one of those things where we always, my mom always talked about the fact that, they took government classes, they took any number of different things in order to get, um, to kind of inform themselves, but, in order to go out in public. And these are things that have not really happened in a long time. And so it's really pretty surprising that we don't talk about that at all.
Yeah, I would even say it's rather disconcerting. It's disheartening because I think civics and art, and when I say art, I mean music, writing, drawing, all of that, are,
Spontaneous thought.
yeah, they're necessary for imagination, and imagination is how you solve any problem.
Oh my God, you were talking about that. I do want to say, like, I think what Jeffrey was talking about, I think we create a schedule for our day, but we don't leave time for spontaneous things that fall into our lap. So
Mhm.
we immediately become overwhelmed because we don't just lay around. And I like taking a day at the end of the week to think about the week, to prioritize what I'm going to do going forward. I like having that mental day. And what you were describing is almost like what we portray in public is an avatar of ourselves, and we don't spend a lot of time on the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, but we sculpt our avatars to be what we think people want, and that causes a disconnect and a lot of
Sure.
stress. You
Yeah, I
know
mean,
what I
we're
mean?
creatures of first impressions, without a doubt.
Right.
Hmm. Well, it's
And
also, I would also say that, when we find coworkers that we get along with really well, it's not because they think our sales pitch self is all that great. It's because they've actually gotten to know the real us, we've gotten to know the real them, and we just happen to click really well. I mean, that's
right.
case in point with my coworkers. It's like they see who I am, the jokes I make, granted, I wouldn't say I don't give them my authentic self. I just don't give them well, my salty language self. I
You're
still keep things.
unabridged.
Yeah, I still keep things somewhat professional in the workplace, but I don't,
Yeah.
but I'm not like giving them my dirty jokes and crap like
Right.
that, just because like time and place.
That's
Right.
true. I feel
Let
like
other
it's changed
people
too.
let other people define the parameters in the
Hmm.
situation, and then don't go past those, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's sort of a wall of filter to let the right ones in, I suppose.
Right.
Absolutely. But no, to your point, Marco, we do spend a lot of time like, you know, if we're not at elevator pitch, we're at, I would, use car salesman, we're trying to impress whoever it is that we're trying to get a raise from, who we're
Yeah.
trying to, get promoted from, we spend a lot of time with that rather than, just saying, hey, look, I know what I'm doing. You
Mhm.
clearly trust me with what I'm doing. I can make that happen.
I do want to say, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, there's people that lost their mothers in this pandemic, and today takes on a new special meaning for those people that did lose those parental figures or mothers, or um patriarchal influencers. And I just want to say happy Mother's Day to all of you.
Indeed. Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, that I
Yeah.
wanted to start the show with that. Oh, I spend all week, every day I wake up, and I think this is a social media driven thing. And I always think, how am I going to start the show this week? And this week I heard a phrase at the beginning of the week and I was like, I love it. And I wanted to offer it to everybody as a mental health objective. And the word is cuddle puddle. Cuddle puddle is just a puddle of cuddle. And I love the idea of that. All I did was think of rainbows and happiness. So if you're going to take a mental health day with your family, maybe put on like a bad movie and just get into a cuddle puddle, you know? And then, of course, it was abortion and Judge Alito. And I was like, oh, I don't want to start the show with that. And then it was Amber and Johnny. And I was like, Amber, Johnny, and then it was abortion again. But then it was Mother's Day. And so I love hearing what was top of mind. I appreciate you taking it in that direction, Marco. We promote somebody called the Earkick app, which is a way to document your good and bad days and then see them over time. They have like an audio ambient mixer where you can add music that calms you down and listen to that. And it's just a great app. So go check out the Earkick app, everybody, for better mental health, because documenting it is part of recognizing it. You said something about trying to fight our mental health, like the things that, you know, we have to fight to get our mental health. And like depression is one of those things. And so what I always say is like, feel your depression, lean into it. Like the first day or two, don't live in it, lean into it. And then you'll find out your analytical mind wants to know what that's about. You know what I mean? And then once you start analyzing it, it just becomes blasé and no more fun. And you just don't do it.
Well, John Cleese had a really interesting lecture. I think it was back in the 70s or early 80s on creativity. And a point that he made, which I think was the strongest takeaway, was that you need to assign time for yourself where you are just creative. You know,
Yeah.
you're just alone and you're creative. And the busier your mind is, the more time it's going to take. So for someone like him, he argued that, you know, in half an hour was not enough. He couldn't even quiet his mind down in half an hour. It took, you know, at least an hour. And I can relate to that. I don't have the samurai brain that a musician has, like my brother, who can just pick up a guitar and instantly the world is blinded from his thought. I'm easily distracted. As the way you put it, you know, it's Mother's Day, it's abortion, there's Amber and Johnny, and you know, and it's just, there's things constantly, you know, flooding in, so to speak.
Yeah. Those things that we didn't plan for.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought
leave the gas on.
I thought it was interesting. When I was looking up, I was watching Ancient Aliens, and they were talking about how Albert Einstein went about his thought process, and he used to do thought experiments. So I looked up thought experiments, and I was listening to your show, and you were explaining how you have a hard time meditating or quieting your mind, right? And how it's hard to do that. And I had that problem too. And then I looked into the thought experiment, and once you can get those going, they're pretty neat. What he imagined was he was riding a light particle through the universe and what the universe would look like during that. And the more we do that, the more we strip away the preconceived definitions of, you know, the borders, and we start to imagine things the way they could possibly be. And so I just had a real fun time, like looking up thought experiments and different ways to quiet the mind, but yet still think and engage my mind as well, because my mind is going to repeat, and it's like a slot machine. It's constantly different thoughts. And
we love rewatching content without a doubt. And that goes with our own thoughts.
I have to like think, but then throttle down and think and throttle down and think. Like you said, it can't happen in just an hour, you know?
Well, my favorite thought experiment is The Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan.
Tell me more.
Which I think was from his first episode of, well, I forget the name of the show now. They just redid it with Neil deGrasse Tyson not long ago. But he touches them. Cosmos. Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah. Which is something I highly recommend everybody watch, at least the original for sure.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a very similar thought experiment. You know, as you pull away from the earth, the trivialities that we deal with on a daily basis, you know, even if they're just a thought experiment themselves, it's so meaningless Not as
Right.
to say that life itself is meaningless, because I don't think it is. I think it's precious, but to the universe, the universe doesn't care what we're arguing about.
Yeah.
No, I think one of my favorite I've got two thought experiments that I absolutely love, and these are some of my favorites to kind of understand how people think. The first one is, what do you think humanity would look like if aliens actually arrived on this planet and they wanted to meet us, not go to war with us, just
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
we actually have definitive proof, it's here in your face, there is no getting away from it, that aliens come to visit us. What does humanity look like that the moment after intelligent life from another planet exists, and we have to confront that? Do all the things that we've fought about suddenly become meaningless? Do they become more meaningful? Do we experience a new love for humanity? Do we experience a new hatred for something different? It's always interesting for me to see how some people just cannot comprehend the idea that there is any other kind of life form out there besides us. And how some, would be like, I honestly, I don't know what I would do, but I would love to find out.
You can
Well, it's also
imagine it
too,
though.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. That's all I had to say. You can imagine it though.
Well,
Mhm.
it's fun to imagine too, and I think I've had that conversation in different ways with other people, and it seems that it's almost always instantly a religious conversation.
Mhm.
Um, I forget who asked the question. It might have been Daniel Dennett, but he said, "What if God did visit us?
Mhm.
How do we recognize God if He did visit us?" Um, and I actually asked that question once because I have a very religious family. They're mainly Christian. And one question I asked a family member once was, if a man walked up to you in your street, he looked like Jesus, in your mind, he looked like him, he spoke the way you thought he would speak, he dressed the way you thought he would dress, and he performed a very simple miracle in his hand. He turned an origami frog into a frog. Would you believe him that he was Jesus? And she said no. And I thought it was very interesting because it seemed convincing to me, but she said no. I said, well,
Sure.
why not? She said, well, there's people can pull all kinds of tricks. There are ways to get around that. So it brought up the idea in my mind. Well, then how do we? Why do we convince ourselves? Where are our perceptions
Mhm.
solid and fluid as far as that is concerned? I think that would be interesting, of course, to be visited by intelligent life, but I think any life found in the universe outside our planet would be profound.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
if
And
people can pull tricks though, couldn't the original Jesus have been pulling tricks?
that's always the fun question. And I, I think that we could go down that list of,
Yeah.
the blind man that could see, wasn't that just one of Jesus's friends? Or, the fig tree that died when Jesus damned it,
Mm,
is that just hyperbole, or was that a tree that was already dying?
yeah.
You can try and answer, explain away all of it, and I think you'll get to know a person in a way that it's funny, because you'll see how they'll explain away something that they wholeheartedly believe that's written in the Bible, or vice versa. They'll explain something away, but then
Mhm.
or they'll explain themselves into essentially believing the Bible, and it's a really interesting concept to watch how people struggle with that back and forth. My
Yeah.
second favorite thought experiment is, it, without this, kind of playing off of the first. If intelligent life shows up with a spaceship and they invite you to another planet, another solar system, another galaxy, to watch, to live there and experience a sunrise and a sunset, knowing that you would have to leave your family behind, or you could take very few people with you, would you leave this planet? My answer is yes.
Yeah.
I would go.
I asked
And
myself the same question from watching that movie. What is it? Spielberg movie, Encounters of the Third Kind. Was that what it was
Oh,
called?
mhm,
Close Encounters. Yeah.
Close Encounters. Yeah.
yep.
We're gonna leave this earth and leave our family behind anyway, regardless. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? At
It
some
seems like
point,
a terrible thought, but really, it's too exciting to turn down, right?
it's just jumping off the end of the pier before you get to the end of the pier. That's all that is.
And it's funny because you get a variety of answers. You have people who are like, I couldn't just leave all of my family. You get people who are like, well, if I could take some of my family with me, I'd think about it, but there's so many things I haven't seen here. Like, yeah, there's a lot that I haven't seen here. I mean,
Yeah,
but at the same time, if you told me that I would get to experience life on a different planet, and all I had to do was step on board,
sure.
it's like, at what point does what we have here become meaningless?
I mean, Ezekiel took that ride, didn't he? In the Bible.
You'll have to remind me. It's been a while since I read the Bible.
Oh, God came down in a fiery storm and took Ezekiel up to the heavens, and Ezekiel pretty much described a spaceship, and then Enoch, I think it is.
Mm.
Right, like there's
Mhm.
two. I watch Ancient Aliens a lot,
They
I just
love to
I don't
reference that stuff. Yeah.
I don't agree that everything that they're talking about is true, but looking at the megalithic structures to me is just amazing. And then little evidences that history is wrong, like finding human footprints next to dinosaur prints is amazing to me, because we think, well, we're about 5,000, 7,000 years old. And the dinosaurs, they went extinct 65 million years ago. So in that meantime, how did that happen? And I love that. You know what I mean? I don't care. I don't care about other life. It's going to affect me or not. But the history of our planet being expanded, that just amazes me,
Well, that makes me think of, again, I've had the thought of like, well, what would an ancient troll be like? What would he do? Right? He
Yeah.
can't go to YouTube to stir the pot. So maybe he
Oh,
made
yeah.
giant Big Bird feet and just walked around on a beach, for 10 years straight.
Yeah.
Right.
I love
And
that.
I love the idea that, because I mean, let's be real honest, practical jokers like us have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
love
just
that.
always interesting to see how what that might have looked like. I mean, even to the point where it's like our very concept of animal intelligence has changed over the course of
Oh,
over the
yeah.
course of modern history.
Oh,
I,
yeah.
I agree. I used to work at medieval times, and I spent a lot of time working with the horses and training them. And that really, I've always respected animal intelligence, in the sense that I've never believed that they're just wholly stupid, and that they are so far removed from our own, let's say, level of thinking that we
Right.
can disregard them. And I can tell you without any doubt that after working with horses, they have as much nuance to their personality and their intelligence, respective to themselves, as we do.
Yeah.
And I think that matters. I think,
Mhm.
I think that that at least should be respected, but it by far more should be studied.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
That was the question on Audio Pong, actually. What's the difference between us and humans? Right.
Yeah, I do that to Zach all the time, and it's tough not to bring it, especially when we're
right.
having a conversation like this. It's tough not to conjure that first, but
It's for me, like I think the realization that I had, was watching one of my dogs dream as a kid one time. And even now when Billy's asleep and I'm watching her dream, it's like, if they were just mindless beings, you wouldn't see that, but they're dreaming.
right.
What are they dreaming about? And you can tell that they have good dreams and they have bad dreams,
Mm.
because I've seen Billy yipe in her sleep. I've watched Billy wag her tail in her sleep, and just you know there has to be a certain level of intelligence in order to have those kind of dreams.
Without a doubt. And I mean, in my opinion, I've read something about dreams. It's a very interesting topic to consider, because the science behind it is, of course, neurological. But why does a mind of any level of intelligence generate abstract reality? The best theory or I guess idea I've heard about it, is that the mind does not categorize fear or emergency to any sort of specific relevance. In other words, if you're in a fire that's burning down, or I'm sorry, if you're in a building that's burning down, as opposed to I don't know, watching something else equally as tragic occur, the mind doesn't say, well, we're going to have one level of fear for that and another level of fear for the other instance, the other event. It's just the same level of fear occurring in your mind, the same emergency, the same level of adrenaline being pumped into you. So dreams do that.
Ukraine cured COVID, right? Because they weren't fearing COVID anymore.
Yeah, right. There's not, if you feared the pandemic as much as you fear war, in your mind, chemically, what's going on, it's equal, right? Even though you may think one is more drastic than the other. So dreams do that, though. Their abstractions generate fear and alarms, let's call them, that, according to this one psychologist, prepare us for similar levels of fear and emergency in real situations. And that made sense to me because it applied to me.
Wow.
My nightmares, you could say, helped me manage very stressful moments in my life, both in work and my personal life. And in a weird, abstract way, I was able to reference those nightmares. My mind brought me to that place so that I could calm myself down and approach things logically.
Can I tell you my last nightmare? I just had it last night. It was Flo from that insurance commercial laying in my bed in an apron, explaining to me why she wears an apron. And I woke up before she answered it. It was weird.
So now you're prepared for any boring board meeting you may have to go to about aprons.
But here's what's so interesting. I try and get stuff together for the minds that I have on, right? And of course, one of the questions I had was, are animals, what are the difference, right? And the second one was, are animals evolving on their own timeline? Like, why aren't elephants building houses, right? Because they're evolving on their own. We talked about animals. What if God was one of us is a question I had. We answered that. Is there life after death? We covered that. So I love the fact that I had us. I predicted a tangent, actually. I kind of like this.
Life after death. Yeah. So, I mean, you could talk forever about any of those topics, I think.
Right.
When you say life after death, do you mean like conscious life after death?
Oh, probably not. Jeffrey was explaining how if he could go to space, he would. And all I was saying was that we're going to die and go there anyway, right? So, either we take the jump or we're going to be forced to go anyway. I don't know. Energy doesn't dissipate, right?
Matter is never born. It's just reused. So
right. And I love universe analogies. People always get upset when somebody disappears out of their life, but I always see it as like an orbit, right? Like, you're the god Mars and you're on the other side of the sun as me right now, but you'll come back around, right?
It's a wonderful way to look at it.
I do have an interesting question. Let's get into this. I wrote down some questions for some of the most introspective and thoughtful minds that I was going to be around. So, and here's a real easy one to get us started. And this one I came up with all on my own. Nobody has ever asked this question before. I find it fascinating. The chicken or the egg?
That is actually a really good question.
Well, I know the answer. I'm just wondering if you all do. You know what I mean?
The egg.
Yep. Okay. Good. Let's move on. I knew if they got boring, we would figure it out. I mean, well, what I think is that something resembling a chicken laid an egg that turned out to be more like a chicken that laid an egg that was finally a chicken that laid an egg. You know what I mean?
That's essentially what Richard Dawkins talks about in
I love this Richard Dawkins.
I think it was, trying to remember the name of the book. The Selfish Gene. It's regarded, I think, as a scientific book, but really that book is something everyone should read. It really changed the way I even look at life in general, and it's just its origins and how it moves.
I love it, and I'll put the link in the description portion of this podcast so everybody can find that. Is it ethical to eat meat?
Well, ethics. I mean, okay. If we try to apply, here's what I think. Morality is a fun thing to try and apply to everything, because I think I agree with Christopher Hitchens that the origin of morality is selfish, but that doesn't make it disingenuous or evil. Um, if we do good things, it makes it better for ourselves and others, right? So generally, it's born from survival. That's the way I look at it. But I don't think that the same level of ethics is applicable across the board. So, there isn't like a morality hammer that we just smash everything with,
Right.
whether it's a glass egg or a skyscraper. So, yes, I would say it is ethical to eat meat,
Me too.
I would agree with that.
as long as it's not human meat. Just
You would be
keep it out of the.
surprised how many people believe in consensual cannibalism.
That's a term. I haven't heard that one yet. Thank you.
I mean, I used to bite my fingernails, right? So
Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at, I mean, that's the thing is that when you look at ethics, it's you hear the argument animals don't want to be eaten. Well, most people don't want to die either. But the thing about it is that when you look at consumption of meat, I would say that there's an ethical way to consume meat, and there's unethical ways in which it's done. And I would argue that we constantly fight the unethical side of it, which is, the mistreatment of the animals. Yes, even though it's destined to be on your dinner plate, that doesn't mean that you have the right to treat it with cruelty. It's no different than when you're out hunting in the wild. There's a certain level of respect you're supposed to have. And at some point, if you find yourself crossing that, like killing an animal just for the sake of killing an animal, then you need to reevaluate yourself and your priorities.
ooh, boom. Okay. Is it ever right to be wrong, Jeffrey? Is it ever okay to be wrong?
Oh, it's always okay to be wrong. It's just not okay to continue to be wrong when you've been educated on something.
How do you feel, Zach? Is it okay to be wrong once in a while?
Yeah, it's important to be wrong. I
like
think
that.
going off what Jeffrey said, that you're malicious if you continually apply what is wrong, if it is harmful to others. In my mind, not to be totally like callous, but I really don't care what people do as long as it doesn't harm others. If you're not harming anyone else with what you do, then it's okay to be so-called wrong. But if you're asking from a more of like scientific point of view, as whether or not
Any
the
point
sky
of
is
view.
blue, for example, then yeah, or the earth is round, it's okay to be wrong as long as you're not harming others with your wrongness.
Right. I do this podcast to bring brighter minds in and diverse perspectives in to be proven wrong. Because if I'm proven wrong here, all those people that are listening that are also wrong, they don't have to be proved wrong to be enlightened. And so that's
Oh, I
my whole
agree.
thing. I love
Yeah.
being wrong. I have no problem being wrong. And when people tell me I'm wrong, I appreciate their perspective. So thank you.
Oh, I agree. I immediately want to know what they
Yeah.
mean. I mean, I've been told, oh, you're a great teacher. It's like, well, I want to be a student again. I want to be learning. So finding out you're wrong is kind of fun, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, I love to be proved wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm certainly I will be a little bit upset if I'm wrong, but at the same time,
Right.
I'm not upset with the person that's proving me wrong. I'm upset with myself for having wrong information.
For the time you invested in a wrong tangent, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like especially when you're like dead certain that what you've known is correct,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're presented with irrefutable proof, and it's like,
Yeah.
how in the hell did I miss this?
Jesus holding a frog, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. I got a good question for you, Marco, and I don't know. This is one of my own. Is anything provable or real to all, or can anything be subject to alternative facts?
Well, that's what we talked about recently, Zach and I. Perception.
Yeah. So you got into my subconscious as I was doing the note and listening to your show.
We were preparing.
Nice.
And yeah, perception is something that we have to use and deal with. I think our mind emulates literally virtually emulates reality, right? It's constantly drawing what we see like a computer program, or a character moving through a video game. So there's people that believe that only what we witness is real, and everything outside of our ability to see and think doesn't exist until we dream it. I think that's a bit too existential. Number one, where's the evidence for that? I'm very much, a hard data kind of person. But also I think that yes, what we perceive can as real will change, and it does change, and that's where we bristle. That's where we butt heads, and it's used against us. That's my biggest fear, my biggest contention with social media is that is constantly being used. We're constantly pitted against each other over things that I thought we had settled at least 40 years ago, but here we are.
My perspective is this, and it's more important than your visualization of it, right?
Well, sure. I mean, our ego was given to us as a broadsword, and how many of us turn it into a scalpel?
Right. I always look at perspectives as sunglasses. And because when I was a kid, I had like green sunglasses and red sunglasses. And when you took them off, you could still see the world through those glasses. And so I love gathering perspectives and then looking at a situation through all of them and finding the one constant, the one spot in the Venn diagram of all of them that's real. That's what I use perspectives for. I think I'm a vessel for other people's perspectives. I don't really know if I have one of my own until I'm in the silence long enough,
Well, I would say it's a disputation even for satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
When do you stop?
Never.
Are you satisfied?
Never. How about you, Jeffrey? Is there anything that's real? I mean, if I tell you that something is red, can we both be assured that we're seeing the same color red?
Ooh, another thought experiment.
Kinda,
I love
yeah.
these. So we talk about what is real a lot. We a lot of the times we try to limit it down to the five senses. Okay, so here's my question then. Have you ever had a dream that has literally incorporated all of your five senses, and then you wake up? Was that not real? And you can make the argument that it is and it isn't. So I'll argue both. A dream isn't real because we know that when we wake up, we're back in reality. There are things we can touch, see, taste, smell, and we know that what we experienced was chemicals and neurons firing to create pictures and sensations, no different than what our brain does. But then by that same regard, what makes a dream real is the fact that it takes all of our senses and applies them in such a way that we feel, we can taste, we can smell, we can hear, we can do all of these things within our dreams. And oftentimes, like real life, we have no control over those very same things. So are dreams reality? And can reality be a dream? And I think that you would be hard pressed to say one way or the other. And of course, there's going to be people that sit down and go, well, a dream can't be reality. That's not possible. But wasn't it real to your mind in those moments?
Are those the same things, reality and real? Like Marco was saying that he takes lessons away from his nightmares because they prepare him for events in real life of equal danger, right? And so he takes lessons away from a dream, which is tangible and something he can access, which makes them real. But I don't know if that dream that he experienced is a reality.
But then here you go. This is where it gets absolutely difficult to say that it isn't reality. You have no experience in interpreting reality beyond your own experience.
Right.
What you view as reality is going to be different from what I view as reality. Just in the way by nature that we experience life through our own senses. Your reality has been altered by the fact that your ability to see is much different than, let's say, the reality that you have in dreaming. My reality of being able to see, my reality in my dreams, Marco's reality of being able to see. So by the definition of reality, using all of these senses, does that mean that what you experience is more akin to a dream than actual reality? Because you are how do I say it, inhibited in one particular sense, much like you might be inhibited within a dream.
Is there moments in sleep when we are able to move into another dimension that is real?
Well, when I was 15, I thought that was. I studied out-of-body experiences, and I was set on making it happen. I listened to a lot of Art Bell and Coast to Coast. I don't know if you guys remember that show in the 90s.
Yep.
And yeah, so that was all about anything that was considered controversial, aliens and metaphysics, you name it.
Yeah.
I did succeed at two things. One, I learned an amazing body relaxation technique that allows me to sleep at will. And it's very simple. I can explain it if you want. And
Do
two,
it. Yeah.
that I discovered, what I essentially discovered was meditation.
Mhm.
And I meditated for many years after that, but I had been doing it wrong. And I think that was a huge change in my perception when I realized that meditation was not relaxation technique, but really just being a witness to yourself, to your own thoughts, and to the things around you. But the relaxation part of it that I learned from this many books I'd read at the time was to, when you're laying on your back and you're in bed, you begin with your toes. The first thing you can feel at the bottom of your body, or the end of your body, however you want to look at that, the muscles that you can feel, tense them and hold them tensed for 15 seconds. And do that all the way up your body, every time tensing for 15 seconds until you reach the last muscle that you can feel in your head, or your scalp. And when you do that, your body will feel, I guarantee, like a puddle, on the floor. You will be so relaxed, and your mind so clear and so open. And because I had done it the first time I did that correctly, I had this incredibly horrible feeling. It was terrifying the first time, of falling through my bed, which was, according to the books I had read, the first step into leaving your body, which, just
Nice.
so we're clear, I don't believe you can do, at least from my point of view. But that experience was terrifying. It literally felt like I was leaving my body, and I experienced paralysis. I could not move. I couldn't scream or speak. And it lasted, I want to say, about 20 seconds, which is an eternity, by the way.
Yeah.
When you lose control of your body, it
Yeah.
feels like
Try and
forever.
record something for 20 seconds. It takes forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe we can leave our bodies. So that's very interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I can't say we don't. I just that I don't believe we can. I haven't done it properly, maybe.
Right. But I love this idea of taking the beginning of the show and the end of our show and like trying that relaxation exercise in a puddle of cuddle.
There you go. It's full circle.
Full circle. Yeah, I like that idea of relaxation. I like giving people the chance to do it. I like this. This has been a pretty good show. I don't know
It's
if I
been
want to
great.
go much further. Let's see. We did the meat thing. We answered a lot of the questions just in normal conversation. Should murderers be executed?
Ooh.
Well,
I've
go ahead,
talked about
Jeffrey. Yeah.
I've talked about my perspective before, so I'm actually interested to hear what you have to say, Marco.
So I'm immediately, at least, reminded of an example that Sam Harris gave at a free will lecture in Australia, where I'll try to shorten it, but basically, imagine you're just sitting somewhere, say a bench, and you're attacked by a crocodile, and the crocodile rips off one of your hands, right? But you recover, you survive. Um, you may, at one point after you've healed, um, even look back on the situation somewhat jovially, because if it's now in, let's say, an enclosure at a zoo or something, you can take your friends and your family to visit and say, that's the beast that almost killed me, and boy, what a great story it makes. But when you swap out the crocodile for a man with an axe, something drastically changes, not just in how you feel about the event, but also how it will sort of unfold, let's say, legally, right? Because we'll prosecute a man with an axe. We won't prosecute a crocodile, at least not anymore. And we also don't feel guilty about killing the crocodile. Not really. We're not going to stop society, and change a great deal of laws or suggest a great change in laws just because we killed a crocodile that took a man's hand, but we will if we start to judge a man with an axe. Because let's say the motive of the man with an axe was psychopathic. He's mentally ill, so he was literally playing out the same. His brain is playing out the same events that a crocodile will. He's not within control. Let's say
Right.
a willful
Instinctive.
control. Right. It's all instinctive. So he's doing what the crocodile would have done. So is he a crocodile? And if you could cure him with, say, a pill or some type of medical technology, would you then want to still judge him? Would you want to kill him? So I think that's where I personally draw the line. I think that it is important to have harsh punishment in order to establish the veracity of laws that need to be vicious. Because what is our judicial system? It's an attempt at decency. It's man's feeble, if I can steal from the Bonfire of the Vanities, it's man's feeble attempt at decency. So if we keep everything too lukewarm, then it doesn't mean anything. It won't have the impact we want it to have, which is technically the greater good, let's call it.
Right.
But if we could cure a murderer, a psychopath at least, of, let's say, his mental illness, his impulse to kill or to harm, then I think morally we should. What we do with him after that, how he suffers or how he rehabilitates after that, that's an even bigger topic. But I think the goal is to fix the person. I also feel that people who serve, I'll end with this, people who do serve, let's say, a long time in prison, because I've known many ex-cons for different reasons, and I do consider them, for the most part, rehabilitated. They paid their debt to society, so they should be treated as citizens again. Again, there's exceptions, but that's how I feel about it.
Agreed. I believe that prison should be an education system that churns out doctorates and bachelors and masters.
Yes.
I think that would be great. And I think I think that if we had free healthcare and free mental health care for every individual in America, we could stop the murderers and rapists and pedophiles before they became assailants. Because I think if they had an off ramp to say, I want to kill somebody, and somebody was there to say, here's why you shouldn't, before they did it, maybe they wouldn't. And then we would know the extremists from just the spontaneous. You know what I mean?
I'm going to rock the boat a little bit,
Rock
probably
the
here.
Casbah. Rock the Casbah.
I don't believe life has the same sanctity as most other people do. And
I
I say
agree with
that,
that.
and I say that not because I don't think, life is precious. I do think that life can be, but this idea that it is, this thing that we have to protect in I would say the traditional Christian way is an outdated way of thinking from when we were a much smaller population that didn't really necessarily understand the mechanics of how life was created.
Right.
And so what we're looking at with, almost 8 billion people on the planet is that, we know how life works. We know how life is created. Life gets churned out every single day.
Mhm.
And when you look at that life that gets churned out every single day, it is clear that if life were sacred, life would be treated the same from one end to the other. And it's not. Nobody thinks that way. They think that way from a book. They think that way from a sermon. They think that way from a religious perspective, or some type of spiritual perspective. But the way in which life is treated is very much not that way. Now, difference is, I don't agree with the death penalty for the same reason most people don't agree with the death penalty. I don't agree with the death penalty not because I think life is sacred. I don't agree with the death penalty because the cost of getting somebody to the electric chair, to lethal injection, is worth far more than if they were housed within the system for the rest of their lives and
It does seem
either attempted
impractical, yeah.
and either they are worked with or rehabilitated, or they're not, and they're just a person that belongs locked away from society because they are a danger.
Yeah.
But the other reason why I also do not like the death penalty is because there is a 4% chance, as things currently stand, that that person sitting on death row is an innocent person. And I firmly do not believe in executing innocence. And so if you're telling me if there is a 4% chance that there is somebody that is sitting there in a cell, 1 in 25, one of those people did not have anything to do with or is not guilty of a crime that deserves death, that is a huge problem to me. That is not worth executing everybody.
Well, I think that's an important distinction. I actually agree. I think in my mind, where I agree with violence as an answer, especially like permanent violence, is in response. Like if you're being attacked,
Right.
Yep.
if you need to protect yourself or even someone important to you,
Right.
and the only answer is to eliminate the attacker, then you should. But yeah, I think I agree. It's rather impractical. There's a lot of things, especially with the prison system, just from what I learned from listening to others that have been in it, that is just hugely impractical, and expensive to us, but lucrative to others. And that was something I learned when I worked in construction for the state of Illinois, that it's in many ways a money machine where they're bending our tax dollars so they have no loss on their investment.
That's right.
Yeah, so that it's all over, definitely.
Yep.
We have to end this episode, but I do want to say somebody that's guilty of one thing might be innocent of 99 other things. It's like, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something went wrong in the person, but that doesn't mean that they're all bad. I like the rehabilitation if our system was rehabilitating people. Thank you for listening to Public Access America. Come back this Thursday for more fun and action. And we're back. That's how easy that is.
Fantastic.
So we can keep talking about the same subjects, but I have a very interesting thought experiment I want to throw into the mix. And then I want to ask Jeffrey about something that happened this week. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to imagine that a violinist falls into a coma, and the music industry, the music community decides that this violinist can only survive if they're attached to somebody else for 9 months. And during the night, the music community comes into your bedroom and attaches this violinist to you. And you wake up. Is it right? Is it wrong?
This is an interesting one, and
yeah, I just wanted people to like think of it. You don't have to answer. I just wanted people. And then Jeffrey, if you want to go on and can you tell me what the fuck happened with Judge Alito's opinion? Can they just say nuh-uh and get away with it legally? So all of that in one, and then I'm gonna let you guys speak while I step away for a second, if that's okay.
So I'm gonna go back to the thought experiment, just because this is a really interesting one, and it has a lot of connotations well beyond just this idea that you can attach a violinist to a person and that they live. Medically, we have the ability to keep people alive damn near indefinitely, which just the reality is that our cells entropy, our marrow entropies, and eventually we cannot replace those cells. Now we've found out that there is a way, and what's crazy is that it's frightening what you could actually do, in that you could actually reverse aging by implanting bone marrow from a child into an adult, because that fresh bone marrow allows a person to regenerate newer, younger cells. You can effectively age backwards by doing that. Now, you want to talk about ethics and morals, that's pretty fucked up. And I don't think that there's any way that you can convince me otherwise. But to go back to having to attach to a person, it's a quality of life issue. And I think quality of life is a huge issue when it comes to everyday people. Now, growing up on a farm, you're surrounded by death, whether or not you want to think about it, whether or not you want to view it. You have animals that you're selling to be slaughtered. You have animals that get sick and die. You have animals that are predated. You have animals that grow old and live happy and healthy lives from one end to the other, and that's the end of it. For me, when I look at this, I see a quality of life issue. Much like, one day my dog's going to get old, and if I'm lucky, you know, I will get to help them pass as peacefully as possible. But the reality is that most people, most animals, their life is a rather violent end, because it's usually, your heart stops, your lungs give out, your organs explode, and you meet a very painful demise. Not all of us get to say, you know what, I'm going to sleep, and if there's another side, I'll see you when I'm there. In this way, what you are doing is you're keeping a life alive for selfish reasons, not keeping a life alive because they want to be kept alive. And that selfishness is what prolongs suffering.
Well, I think quality of life is definitely where we sort of hang our shirt in the argument, because I'm the type of person, I would agree, actually, first of all, with most of what you said. I think the quality of life is what needs to be considered. I also think it's important to be rational about what the limits of quality of life can be. I think it's treated as sort of limitless, as if there's just this utopia that we could grant each other somehow, but there aren't. There's peaks and valleys to quality, and we certainly can't reach the peaks, but we seem to be convinced we can, because we seem to hit the valleys quite easily. But that said, it's something, it's where I usually argue, like even in the pro-choice or in the abortion debate, is that it seems often enough to me that the quality of life of the mother isn't even taken into account. Everything is everybody's thinking about the soldier that could be, the voter that could be, the orphan that could be, even though somehow that is automatically equitable. But I don't think it is, and I think that I agree. I think it's a very selfish thing, because I also think quality of life. What is a person? What does it mean to be a person? What does it take to be a functioning person?
Yeah.
Someone made an argument once. I forget the scientist's name. He's like, we believe we can prove uh, mental damage. So if you suffer a concussion or you're born with a disability, it may be permanent until you die, or even get worse. And so we know that the brain can be damaged in so many ways that are irreversible, and yet at death, that is all somehow repaired, and we can now fully function our consciousness again. That's a wonderful thought. If it was true somehow, or we could prove it, I think that would of course change the argument, but we have to live with the evidence that we do have. And yeah, the quality of life needs to be considered. So it does. I mean, does that mean, well, then, hey, do you agree with, what level of euthanization do you agree with? Like, how far can it go? As far as I'm concerned, I think even a person who suffers, and you all remember Dr. Kevorkian. I don't think that what he did was unethical. Maybe in part it could be argued, because he was the first, celebrity of that type of, let's call it science, or ethics. But I do agree that even because I believe in that level of liberty that the individual should have. I don't think you should be able to kill yourself because it was Orange Tuesday instead of pineapple, but you should have a control over the level of your quality of life when it comes to the amount of suffering that you have to manage, that you have no control over, at which point the only control is death, if you want to look at it that way, which I do. And I think that can be applied even to unborn life.
Mm-hmm.
Very-
Having been suicidal in my youth, I would say that in my youth, I probably would have said, absolutely, let me choose to die when I want to die. But having gotten better, I wouldn't say fully. I mean, I have my mental health issues still. It's, I'm not suicidal anymore, and I have my good days and my bad days. There are certain lines and limits, but at the same time too, I also understand that, having lost a friend, that they didn't want the doctors, they didn't want the medication, they didn't want the friends, they didn't want the therapy, they didn't want, the commitment to a psycho ward. the reality of when a person chooses that it's done is really tough on everybody else, but it's not tough for the individual if they're there. If you have paid attention to the news, there's a 22-year-old cheerleader, I forget where she was out of, who just ended her life, and she just couldn't do it anymore. And to me, the biggest crime in this isn't, people tried. And I mean, this is a reality that everybody needs to understand. Yes, do what you can to keep your friends alive, but at some point, there is a pain that we're all going to feel when that life separates from us, and we view it as not their time. And unfortunately, without knowing how this individual took their life, I can only assume that it was violently, because there are very few peaceful means for someone to pass on their own without violent help, be it medications or firearms.
Yeah.
What makes this difficult is that the people around her are suffering because they didn't see it as her time to go. And you think about it, 22 years old is, with no other, no terminal cancers, organ failures, things like that. It's really tough to understand the concept that this person just was done. They couldn't do it anymore.
Well, I think the worst thing about depression is not that you feel bad, but that you have hope you won't.
Right.
And it's that lingering that poisons you.
It
Yeah, I can relate. And I agree. I think that goes back to what you talked about, or what we talked about earlier about perception. That's what essentially I think we're trying to do when we try to help someone, is change their perception. You can't do anything if they don't perceive things differently, as far as I'm concerned.
You can't. And a therapist told me once when I was going through therapy because of my own issues, and once when I was going through therapy after a friend that I lived with for 4 years took his life, you can't help someone who doesn't want the help. And that was the difference. I didn't want to kill myself. Realistically, I did not want to do it. I just, like you said, there was the hope that I wouldn't feel anything. I wouldn't feel bad anymore.
You don't want to take away the option in the conversation, in the thought experiment,
And so when I finally found that I could feel a different way, absolutely I wasn't ready to give up on being alive. But for that person who, my dog's barking, but for that person who can't see that, who can't find that, who either has tried everything or is completely unwilling to, what do you do? It's this is a tough one. It's not like somebody who's terminal and it's like, look, I'm either going to die violently on my own, or I'm going to die peacefully on my own accord. And that's what makes this so difficult, and then you have the existential question of, does a person with depression, is that the ultimate fate? That we don't want to believe that a person who is struggling that badly is going to die violently on their own, much like somebody who has a heart attack or organ failure or cancer, because we want to think that we can change a person's mind in some way, shape, or form, whether it's cancer, whether it's therapy, whether it's medication, if there's a chemical imbalance, or if there's something physically wrong that's causing this issue. We want to think that there's some way that we can change that.
Sure, we hope. We always want a magic wand if we can get it, but it's just not the case. I read a book once on toxicity, as it relates to our relations with people in our lives, and I think it relates to your thought experiment here, because the level of sacrifice we make is dependent, according to this author, on the amount of time we invest our emotions into someone else. And so you can reach a point where you quite literally care more about someone else than you do yourself. And it's very easy to use myself as an example. What I struggled with through most of my life was liking myself. It was very difficult. It was very easy for me to jump in front of a bullet, let's say, for somebody else, like a stranger,
Right.
but I had no care for my own. And it wasn't necessarily always a degradation. Like I didn't beat myself up over it, but I certainly did sometimes. And discovering a way to like yourself, man, that is like a brand new day. That changes everything. And that's usually what I think I'm trying to do now. If for some silly reason,
or that you don't have to hate yourself before other people discover why they should hate you, right?
well,
Like
even that, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that.
You see your flaws, and we know other people are going to see them too and judge us for them. So we want to like knock our self-esteem down to prepare for that. But it never happens because people don't see our flaws necessarily as flaws, you know?
Well, most people don't care, right? You have to tell yourself
Right.
that. They just don't give a shit. So it's
Right.
get over yourself. We used to have a cone when I worked in construction with this mini, like, safety cone on the dashboard.
Yeah.
And I used to keep it there. And I would tell my boss, I said, that's our therapist. And so his boss one day said, he said, what the hell is that? I said, that's our therapist. He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, when you're having a bad day, you shout at the cone. You tell, you complain, you get all your angst out. And I said, eventually you reach a point where you feel silly because you're shouting at a cone. Then you get over yourself and you're fine. He said, oh, I need a cone.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is like we learn to develop tools in various different ways. For me, it's anything from baking and playing music to, sometimes I just really get trapped in my own head and I just have to fucking muscle through it. And I have to, it's like, what you're feeling is stupid. Is it really though? Well, why do you feel that it's stupid? What are you really feeling? What's actually happening? And for people who haven't had the time or the ability or the resources to learn those tools are going to struggle more than if they had heard, for example, having a cone on your dashboard.
Well, people have always been told to muscle through it and not to lean into it. But once we lean into it, like I said, we examine it for what it is, like what Marco just said about the cone. You're yelling at a cone. Once we start analyzing the depression we're in, we're like, there's nothing fundamentally analytically correct about this. There's no rationale for the depression I'm in. And so you still feel that, but it happens less because you go into an analytical perspective about a depression. For me, like I used to have anxiety attacks, but I learned to like think about what I was going to cook, divert my attention while still analyzing the situation. You know what I mean? And that's how I normalized
Sure.
it. It was like, it's like, is that a ghost? That might be a ghost. That's not a ghost. It's a shadow. Is it a shadow? Why is there a shadow? It's a light. I thought about it. There's no ghost. I'm not scared. Right.
Well, the mind hates wasting time. So once you reach that point, once you convince your mind that you're wasting time, it's out. That the problem seems to just go away.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think what was interesting about that thought experiment was that, yes, there is a right to life, but that life isn't necessarily entitled to the means of survival, right? Like Marco, you said something very important to me, and it's kind of the track I wanted to go on was, when did we stop thinking about the mother who constitutionally has this word life in the Constitution,
who was a person first,
protecting them? And currently, is what I know is life isn't exactly life until 20 weeks. So we have that time. We never had a debate about when life is life. And I'm happy to have this debate at some point. Judge Alito bypassed that. But it's just, there's a separation. The mom has a right too, right? To liberty. Liberty is like not being oppressed. And so we deserve options that contain abortion, just like we contain nose jobs and boob jobs and abortions. These are things that we shouldn't be oppressed with. If we want to fix our lives or change our lives, it's in our power to do that, right? And then the pursuit of happiness. Those are the three. Judge Alito said abortion isn't in the Constitution, and I think it is when it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, I mean, definition, that's open-ended. I also think that as far as, oh, I lost my thought.
Sorry about that.
No, what you said was profound, and I wanted to because I totally agree with what you just said, and I wanted to point out the fact that um no, I lost the
You
thought.
got it. That's what we're here. We're for
Yeah,
thought,
it'll come
right?
back around.
I just think once you determine that the fetus is alive, then it's not the mother's responsibility necessarily to keep it alive. It's for whoever wants to keep it alive if they want to keep it alive.
Oh,
But
now you remind me what I was going to say. I
good.
suspect that it's less about ethics and more about politics and economics, really, when you get down to it, because population control is that's a really big topic. It's probably just as varied as
Right.
economics, and they go hand in hand. And I'm definitely not smart enough to really be analytical about it, but that's my suspicion, my conspiracy is that it had very little, maybe, in fact, to do with the emotional bondage of life and more to do with what that life can produce if it is allowed to grow.
Okay. Like
So
black and brown people disproportionately suffer more during abortions than white people do. So we're going to race to the bottom and hope the white people survive.
I'm not sure I understood that. Yeah,
yeah,
I didn't get that. What do you mean?
Well, black and brown women suffer more deaths during pregnancy than white women. So if we eliminate abortion, even in the terms of a mother's rights, then more black people will die if we get rid of abortion than white women. So it'll be a race to see who dies
Is that
faster.
because what is the cause of that though? Is that because more black women are impoverished or at a level of life where they have less
Yeah,
access, like, globally,
yeah,
or is that more of a Western society statistic?
it's an American thing for sure.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of doctors are taught to dismiss most pain, you know, and so they just dismiss black people strangely more than others. It's documented, and I still don't know quite why it would be that a black doctor would dismiss a black woman's pain more than a white woman's, you know. But we've
it
talked about that.
it's like the whole discussion is really interesting, and I wish I had more information to be
Yeah.
able to talk about that. But
We will get some more information and talk about that in a show. But can you talk about, did you read Judge Alito's opinion at all? Is there
I
anything like
did
legally valid in there that we can start to discuss? Or was it
here
all religious and eugenics?
here's the problem with
Cool. Thank you.
much like the way, unfortunately, gay marriage was decided. Abortion rights are decided in the same way.
Mhm.
You didn't have the right until the Supreme Court ruled in a very narrow and very specific manner that you did have a right. The problem is that as cases come up and as new modalities come up, those modalities can challenge the overall ruling. So this is where I have my greatest concerns, having worked in the legal world. The problem with any law, the problem with any ruling is that it is in effect until it is nullified by the Supreme Court. Oftentimes we think of the Supreme Court as, oh, well, if they've ruled on a case, then it's absolutely settled. The problem is that people are very much blind to the fact that just because the Supreme Court rules on something, that doesn't mean that they can't turn around and rule on it in an inverse later. I mean, you look at slavery. Slavery was constitutionally legal, and it took a lot in order to get slavery to be illegal. But even then, constitutionally speaking, it actually is still legal, whether people want to admit it or not, and it's part of the 13th Amendment. So you have that to consider. With this ruling, essentially what they said is that the grounds in which it was decided was beyond government reach. And the way that and basically you have to understand the way in which, you know, Roe versus Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Casey was decided is that in a very narrow window, they said, yes, It is not, government is not to create an undue burden on, is what the ruling really was. The problem is that the government left it vague. They left it very vague. So what you have seen are a number of different challenges to those laws. What does an undue burden constitute? And what you're seeing in this ruling is that because the way that they're trying to push that is that, what each state can define as an undue burden should be considered, not what the feds should consider it as. And I happen to disagree with this, even though I'm very much a person who believes that, there's a lot of things that states should be able to decide for themselves. The problem is that this is something that stems beyond a state, and I believe that it needs to be a federal law.
Part of
So
the Constitution, right? Like an amendment to the Constitution.
Something to that effect.
Ideally, if not a law, and if not a law that can be overturned by a Senate majority later,
Right. And the problem you're going to have with a law like that is that you will never get enough to get a constitutional amendment pushed through.
No, you need 37 states, and right now there's only 22 that would uphold abortion rights.
Yep. And so that's the problem. And essentially is that what people viewed as settled law, when you have 26 states on the books that will actively ban it, you wouldn't even have enough to prove its constitutionality based on what states are doing. I happen to disagree vehemently with that. But what I also happen to disagree with is the method in which we try to create these laws. And this is something that Jason, you and I have talked about before, but I do believe that in certain cases, it requires direct democracy, i.e. the American public should be voting on this.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be up to the state. It shouldn't be up to the House of Reps. It shouldn't be up to the Senate. It shouldn't be up to the president. It shouldn't be up to the Supreme Court. If the majority of Americans, and in a case like this, I would say 2/3.
Right.
If 2/3 of Americans said abortion needs to be legal and accessible on a federal level, then it would not give way for Supreme Court justices or the president or the House or the Senate or even states to argue whether or not this is legal.
Right.
This is the will of the people and you cannot ignore it. And so that is one of our biggest problems I see fundamentally with our democracy is that we vote for representatives, we vote for senators, we vote for presidents, we don't vote for justices necessarily. We vote for them by proxy.
Right.
But we do not vote on major issues that impact Americans directly. And I think that is problematic. And I think that is one reason why not only are you seeing a challenge like this to Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, but you're going to see this prop up again with gay marriage.
Yep.
I mean, Texas is already looking at a way to, quote unquote, settled laws is that, children of immigrants are to be educated in the American system. They're already challenging that. And so the thing is that all it takes is a specific enough case to completely overturn something that was considered settled law. And we've seen this happen in good ways, but also in bad ways too.
Yeah, every time we win, they see it as a loss, right, Zach? All right, Marco?
Well, how do we escape tribalism? I mean,
right.
This world that's
what we're trying to get past is the tribalism to a consensus.
Well, do we want to escape tribalism, though? I mean, you could argue that many aspects of tribalism are conservative and therefore they protect things that don't change, right? Points of view or even perceptions of reality or science, let's say. I get that. I can understand that. You mentioned direct democracy. To me, that's a really slippery slope from, again, my amateur point of view. I don't think there's a lot of good things that I've heard about that or read about that, having at one time being a history buff. I'm trying to give like good example, but unfortunately I can't.
Yeah,
from
there's
my
a lot of
experience,
state referendums, like
yeah,
you
it just
know,
seems
in
like, yeah.
California, the you can get married if you're gay law and all of that. Those were referendums in states, but I don't know any national referendum
Well, I
that's
wonder
happened.
too, like, does every
But I love the idea, but how would you word it? Because the referendum would become law, so you would have to tailor it. Who would tailor that?
well,
And
that's what I was going to get at, was like, when it comes to civil liberties, I mean, uh, just to give you an example, like, I think nothing is more important than free speech. I think everything
Mhm.
depends on free speech. That is
Mhm.
the core of liberty. Um, so to me, that is a liberty that should be defended federally,
Mhm.
nationwide. Perhaps, I mean, really, I believe globally, but
Mhm.
maybe, and this is kind of devil's advocate, but maybe there are liberties that are defended more locally at a state level, because I feel like we operate more. There's a term, feudal oligarchy, and I think we operate, really, that's what I see our society as a feudal oligarchy, not really a democracy, or even a republic, because it
Mhm.
is. I mean, the kings of gold, let's say. I'm getting, analogical, but the kings of gold, they make the rules. So they're the ones that create the pressure that we have to live in. They
right,
also are responsible for managing our society, whether we want them to do it or not. They are doing it. So you could say the world is run by villains, but it is the villains that are keeping things together too. So I don't know really where I stand when it comes to things like, well, first of all, morally, marry who you want. Again, if you want to bathe in olive oil and watch Mr. Rogers backwards, I don't care. That doesn't hurt anybody. But your pursuit of happiness, I think, to some federal level, yeah, that to some federal level should be defended. I mean, at least you should
Mhm.
be allowed to do things that don't harm others. You want to
right,
have a gay marriage, great. You want to,
right.
maybe two transgender people want to, I don't know, maybe they want to switch back and forth, depending on what decade it is, and then get married. I don't care. That doesn't, I think that's fine. Um,
As long as there's mutual consent involved. Somebody can't marry
right.
an animal or a child
And
because there's no consent.
here is where things get fun. All right, let's talk about consent, because this is going to be fun. Who do we say is capable of giving consent? Can you
What?
Well,
define that?
yeah,
Who
that is an important question, right?
In what
who is
situation?
in any situation, it doesn't matter. Who is capable of giving consent?
Well, in terms of abortion, or in terms of pro-life and
Just in
pro-choice,
general. Just in general.
well, we
Let's
decide
The
we
individual.
decide we decide what and who and when is allowed to give
legally,
consent. Right.
legally though, what is the definition of consent?
Oh, I don't know the legal definition of consent.
So the legal definition of consent is anybody over the age of 18 that has their mental faculties, that is capable and unhindered to give consent or confirm a transaction. So, who can give consent?
Ooh.
At 17, you cannot give consent, but at 18, you can. At 17,
Unless,
you can't. Nope,
if you're,
nope,
you said if you have your mental capabilities and you can
nope,
consent, then yes.
nope. 18 plus.
18 and
18.
mentally
This is
disabled
legal.
can't consent.
Exactly. So they don't have their mental faculties if they're 18 or
Exactly.
older. But at 17, for example, you cannot consent. Now,
Right. Even if they're a genius.
states have come up with different ways around that for different things.
Ew,
You can
why?
consent to different things. Like, for example, you can't get beer and cigarettes, but you can definitely, have sex with a 30-year-old man at the age of 14. Looking
Oh,
at you, Arkansas.
gross.
So how does that make any sense? So if children can't give consent, like in a legal course, you can't sign contracts, you
Right.
can't you can't do any number of things. You
Of course.
legally cannot consent.
Right.
So now let's look at what abortion looks like in terms of consent. You have one party who is not consenting.
Right.
So why is it okay to violate their consent?
I
You would
think you
have
said
to
it.
you
That's the
have to
problem. There's two parties. That's the real problem.
but even still, it doesn't matter if one party consents and the other party doesn't. That's not consent.
True.
That's not consent.
if we were a nation solely of party and not of people, like at some
Well,
point, like
well, when
popular
I say
opinion
party,
has to be.
I'm talking individuals. I'm talking legal, what the legal definition of parties, not the political definition of parties. So one person consents, one person doesn't. It doesn't matter. There's no consent. That would, if you could rule based on that logic alone, rape wouldn't exist, for example, because one party consented.
Well, unfortunately, some people that is how
Wow.
they consider
Exactly.
that.
You lost me all the way until the end of that, and now I'm just intrigued. But a woman's going to get an abortion whether the father agrees or not, if she wants to.
Now that's where once again, going back to my roots, the act of banning things doesn't work. All you're not removing the thing that you claim to hate. All you're
No, it
doing is
never
making
works.
you're just
History
making
proves
it
that all the time.
exactly. And so the difference here is that if one party doesn't consent, why then should another party be able to force and enforce something that doesn't, there are very few things in life where we actually make the exception. So for example,
And
um
that's a perspective driven argument, because I'm looking at it from both perspectives going, well, yeah, why could the Democrats make me consent? And then I'm looking at the other perspective, like, why should they make me not? Why are they taking my right? Why can't, like you can
and,
see that, and
mhm.
you can form an argument just based on that alone. And I don't think you have to do all that. There's a mother, a father, a baby, and a discussion, and they should have any option in that
Now,
situation.
here's where this gets interesting, because in the legal world, we talk about remedy. What does remedy look like? So this was actually a discussion that we had in the house, and this was a really tough one. For example, if a mother, if two people decide that they're going to have a baby, great, there's consent. If the father doesn't want the baby, but the mother does, we don't think twice about it.
Right.
The father can't force the mom to get an abortion.
Right. The father doesn't have a violinist attached to him for 9 months.
So when you think about that, here one party may not consent to having the kid, but there is no way to force that other party to not have the kid.
Exactly. Everything has a
In
right to
this
life,
case,
but it doesn't have the right to the methods to sustain it.
the remedy, there are a couple of ways that this gets remedied. Number one is, obviously, a lot of people hear about the child support methodology, which is dad's not involved but pays because, well, takes two to tango. The
Bad
other
accountability.
The other is in the legal world is you forfeit parental right. And so, while the child was quote unquote fathered, the child never has a father on record of birth.
Oh
And
no,
so
don't take away my responsibility.
and
Come
so
on.
and so basically, what you have is a remedy in this case where the child can be born, but the responsibility doesn't have to be born. Now you have the inverse. This is the toughest one. You have someone who fathers a child, who essentially has what they see as a right to that child, and this is where Planned Parenthood versus Casey comes in. But you have a mother who doesn't consent to that. In technological terms, there is no remedy. You either have to force a person to carry the term, or you remove that life. And that's where this gets tough. Technologically speaking, we're only in like the very, very beginnings of artificial wombs, where you could
I was
potentially
just going to
have
mention that actually.
you could potentially have that issue of, yeah, the mother could abort the child, but in order to do that, there's a medical way in which you do this that gets implanted into an artificial womb, et cetera, et
We
cetera,
don't
et
we
cetera.
don't throw away the massive cells. We keep it in a artificial status.
So,
And the woman then denies her parental rights along with the.
Well,
but
they
now
brought up a
here's
conversation
I
about
like
states
that.
being able to own babies, basically, and
Ew.
what type of citizen would they create? Would they have the same rights? It almost sounds like slavery, and it's some kind of dystopian
Ew.
future.
now exactly. Now here's where this gets difficult is that what does remedy look like? And the answer is that you would have to force someone to go through what is a very violent procedure and very traumatic in order to sustain that. No different than, people like to think that, abortion is just like, people are just going in and it's a walk in the park. It's still a
why
very
do they think
violent
it's
and
like a
traumatic
fun tea
experience.
party or something? That's an invasive procedure that leaves people sore and crippled for days.
So this is one of those things where it is a very, there are people out there that are much brighter minds than I am. I can only speak to the legality of what I see and what my experience is. And I'm sure that there's a ton of legal minds out there far better than mine. The real answer is that, in this case, there is no remedy. And even if there was a remedy, that remedy is still very violent and very intrusive and
That's
very
why,
traumatic.
well, that's why I wonder if it is a liberty that is better defended by a state, because then at least the parents or parent have the option of leaving the state they're in that doesn't protect them or agree with their choices to go to one that does.
I wish they did.
So now let me put this into perspective. Let's remove the term abortion and put the term slavery in place. By this regard, slaves could have just left slave states to go to free states. It's no different. You're establishing underground railroads to get person to a freedom that is defined in another state.
I wouldn't say that's synonymous at all. Actually, I think the variables comparatively are hugely different. I mean, we're talking about, first of all, a slave and a modern mother. They have two different levels of rights. I mean, you're an American citizen no matter which state you go to as a pregnant mother. The difference of being a person and a slave, that is a far more dramatic difference.
I think it is less dramatic than you think it is, because if you are forced to carry to term, wouldn't that constitute a form of modern day slavery?
Yeah, because you have a violinist attached to you.
Your job is to produce that life and produce that life only. Nobody gives a shit about you before or after.
No, it's not the same, because you have a choice. So the very fact that you have that freedom to move, just being able to move around, I think, is being taken for granted.
I disagree. And the reason I say that is because in a state like Washington, we have the ability to openly access those clinics. But if that mom from Texas does that in Washington, she will be arrested and charged with murder the moment she goes back to Texas. That's no different in my mind. If you're going to go back and the first thing that's going to happen to you is you find yourself in violation of the law and are thus going to be locked away. We did the same thing. We did the same thing for people who ran away from their slave owners.
There would be a bounty on both, right? A runaway slave and a runaway mom at that point.
But then
you're also saying, without saying it directly, you're saying that the value of a slave, because that is the reason why a slave is important at all, is because they have economic value, right?
Well, that's production value, yeah.
And that's why, and that's what they're saying about with the mothers. The mother has a productive value to have that kid in order to do whatever it is the state wishes that be done.
But that conversation is being held silently, right? There's no one admitting to that. That's my point.
Right. Nobody is saying this is slavery on a mother.
No one wants to equate a human life to them having a not necessarily a social score, but essentially a social score, a productive value, as you put it. And they don't want to do that because it does relate in the term in the example you gave to slavery. So I think that's a distinction that, to me at least, stands out pretty prominently.
Well, I will agree, and I want to say that if you cross the Mason-Dixon line as a slave, you become a whole person. But when you go back, you're 3/5 of a person, and I think that's what Marco was debating the issue of.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could also bring up the point too that slaves that did escape to what they called free states, they weren't American citizens.
Right.
They were free slaves, which was its own distinction, its own category. It had its own explanation of that, had its own limitations and rights as well. They couldn't just walk in and have the same luxuries, let's say, as white people or people who weren't slaves.
That's the
But
whole tribe here in Florida was runaway slaves. I can't remember the name of them.
and
Oh,
then
yes.
and I think that, looking at it through a historical lens, the difference is that if we were having this discussion in 1865, we would be hard pressed to find any differences, because women didn't have those rights. Didn't matter
Right.
if they were white, black, or brown. The difference is that we have time and we have legal rulings that have allowed the perception that that all of those women now
Mhm.
have those rights, where into whatever state line they cross. And so that's where I say it is comparable. It's not a one-to-one, but trying to look at it through the eyes of 1865, it very much would have been a lot closer. And applying that now, it is a lot closer. It's very uncomfortable to think of it in that realm. Yes.
Yeah, boy, this should be its own podcast.
This is and
It made
here's the
me
thing is,
uncomfortable to think about. I'll
I
tell you
would I
that
would I
much.
would love to have I would love to have a black woman have this discussion with us, because we know that when it comes to abortion and abortion rights, black and brown women are disproportionately affected.
Well, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's what matters really to me, is what not necessarily the statistics, but what is the data, what is the real life experience of people that do have to deal with these things. I mean, look, my argument is, if it isn't historical, it's philosophical. I'm a middle-aged single man.
Right.
I've never even had children myself, so I can only
Right.
argue for the personal liberty of someone and try to be rational about it. So I agree that I think it's definitely one of those topics that maybe as you said, we've come a long way. We've established a lot of laws that have introduced a lot of new freedoms, which are good things, but
Right.
maybe we're close to as perfect as it can be. I don't know. I think only the future will tell us that, and we'll see. Because I mean, how many more good decisions can we come to? When you said, like the example you gave, when you look through anything through a historical lens, yes, it's far more stark. I mean, it's black and white. You could say it's a no-brainer. This is the more moral thing to do, but we are no longer at that point. Yes, if it was
Right.
1865 still, we wouldn't even be discussing the rights of women. That wouldn't even, I mean, we laugh over a cigar, maybe. I mean, even if I was born in that time, I can't say habitually, morally, I would be a different,
If you weren't a
person.
landowner, you wouldn't even be voting,
Right.
Right, exactly. So
That's why it's difficult to have these discussions, and it is
Kind of.
difficult to compare. But when you look at function and you look at the way things functioned, you can see more comparisons than you want to realistically admit. Like you, I mean, even in the news, there have been discussions about, people there are organizations out there setting up essentially, you know, uh, means for people to
Transportation from,
leave
yeah,
these states to make it to other states.
no
That
orgs and
sounds
yeah.
way too familiar to something else historically that we already know and learn about in the history books.
well, it's repeated. It's been done before as well. It happened in the late 80s and it happened in the mid 90s, in like 94, 95, I want to say. I mean, that was something that was like a fearmonger piece of news I saw recently, was bringing that back up, saying, basically claiming that, religious conservatives are going to be attacking doctors to perform abortions again, even without having a case to represent it, any actual occurrence. I think that kind of thing is unfortunate, to just cause fear in general. And I don't really
Yeah.
think we should worry about threats that aren't threats yet, even though history does repeat itself.
For
But
me, my realm though, like where I work is risk, and I have to think about this stuff all the time. The idea that you don't worry about it until it happens is not something that, at least in my line of work, I get the opportunity to afford. I
right.
have to plan for what that risk is, and when that pops up, I need to have any number of game plans that can mitigate that response. And I guarantee you, all of these states now are going to be coming up with those game plans.
Sure.
Whether it's acceptance, or means of jailing, or any number of different possibilities.
They've already jailed somebody for having a miscarriage in Texas.
Yep. And then they also, the prosecutor declined to prosecute it.
Yeah, that's what we're finding out in Michigan.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
prosecutors are
why would you
standing up and
prosecute
saying
that?
we're not going to prosecute it because
Yeah.
the Supreme Court has no army to enforce their means. Like that thing that got leaked, they have nobody to investigate it, but they're going to investigate it using some I don't know. I don't know what they're called, but they're not they're security. They're not investigators in the Supreme Court. They have no way to enforce their
Right.
stuff. But
And
what I
also
hear you
leaking isn't
saying,
illegal.
what I hear you saying about this is that much like executive orders, we've been using Supreme Court decisions to prop up the failures in our Constitution, and that we need to work on. After ERA, we realized we couldn't get an amendment added. Something as simple as equal rights for women couldn't get 37 states. So we just dropped that, and we no longer thought about getting amendments for abortion rights or anything else, or gun rights for that matter. Yes, you have the right to possess and own bear arms, but you don't have the right to own a gun, because abortion isn't in the Constitution and neither is the word gun. So we have to be careful about this slippery slope that Alito is forcing on us. But we need to do the hard work of building a consensus to amend a really ancient article that we live under, that people live under, but others live above. Let's say that.
Yeah, I think that's why I disagree with you, Jeffrey, about direct democracy. I feel like maybe you do come to the conclusion of a direct democracy that's favorable when you do it at a state level. When it builds up, it evolves into something federal. I mean, isn't that essentially what we do now
Yeah, that's
with a
what
lot of things?
we always talk about, community rights. And I always believe that something should be started as simple as in a homeowners association and build into the local community, and then other
Hmm.
communities see that, represent that, and like you said, then suddenly
If it
it's
has real traction, it will grow.
right, then it's a popular idea. Like
Mhm.
green energy is popular. People are fighting it, but even Skill went green. So
Mhm.
it's something that's being popularized, and that's how
Maybe we should
consensus grows.
maybe we should worry about the things that work against the growth of good things too, though.
Well, I
Mhm.
mean, everything naturally gets pushback. It's just
Yeah,
if it's good for the community or not. And that's for the community members to see.
That's
free speech.
yeah.
I just want a representative that represents his district. So
Yeah, no kidding.
if that district is radically Republican, then by all means be that. You know what I mean? But come to Congress rational, and you have to interpret your community's desires, and you can't do
Mhm.
that if they're not talking to you.
Well, that's the number
So
one thing I think that I run
right.
into, at least with the demographic of people that I'm surrounded by, is that they want people that stick to their guns. That
Mhm.
if they're going to represent a series of ideals and beliefs, then they need to
Right.
represent them and defend them. When they're wrong, things can be adjusted, but just to change their mind because it gets them the support they want, that is, I mean, that is completely immoral as far as I'm
Exactly.
concerned.
That's where we lose our democracy, is when
Sure.
when
Yeah.
in a town hall meeting the mayor says, I'm going to do what I want anyway. And then
Right.
Mhm.
we lose a little bit, and then that grows. And I don't care if Matt Gates, I hate Matt Gates. That's who represents me, Matt Gates, right? And my issue isn't that he's yelling about some stolen election. It's the fact that he hasn't gotten me any budget for new roads. He didn't vote to get me new bridges. He didn't vote to get rid of this dump smell in my state, in his district. That's why I have a problem with Matt Gates, is because he hasn't listened to us about what we need.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You're lucky.
That's a fun one.
You have great representation. Where are you, Marco? What state are you in?
I'm in Illinois. I'm not far from you guys. I'm near Chicago, a suburb of Chicago. And I've lived
I
here most of my life. I'm planning to move. I actually favor the Southwest,
no.
just because I like out there. There's more space, and I feel like people bump heads a lot less.
No.
And really, I'm not a political person, not in the sense that I would pursue it. I'm an artist.
Right.
I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Me too.
That's
Unless
fair.
they ever invent like professional logic wrestling, because I'm pretty aggressive and competitive. But other than that,
Yeah.
I think that's where I love logic wrestling. Like I love someone who challenges my way of thinking, and I
Mm,
love, I think that's definitely what, one of the things I love about Debbie is that Debbie always challenges the way that I think about things.
yeah.
And fuck, it's frustrating, when they beat me in a logic game, but it's also fun because in the end I still get to learn something. There was one night Debbie and I, we were going back and forth with each other, trying to paint each other into a logical corner to where the other couldn't escape. We were getting really heated and really animated, and our oldest came down crying because they thought we were fighting and that we were going to end up getting divorced. Meanwhile, the two of us were having fun. It's like, I got you this time, motherfucker.
My mom used to debate me on stupid things, and then when I wouldn't win the argument, she would take my side and start arguing. Like she took the winning side and would left me with the losing side, and then I would have to debate that till I won that side before I could leave the house.
Oh, I did it very often with my father. Is I would argue until he became aggressive, and then I would just completely agree 100%, and I would just paint how ridiculous his point of view was. Unfortunately, it shuts people up when you do that. So
yeah,
I'm not sure if you get to him or not, if it made any sense to him, but
yeah, they never did this logic wrestling.
It will win you a debate. I'll give you that.
Yeah, but it won't win you friends, will it?
It might. Yeah,
it might.
Yeah.
I mean,
I like being the stupidest person in the room. It's a lot less responsibility to learn than it is to teach,
Oh, I mean, with the way this world is, bring me back as beautiful and stupid, please. I'll sign up for
that. I like that. So let me ask you guys. I'm going to start with you, Jeffrey. Do you have any just the tips this week?
Take a mental health day if you need it. Like, seriously, this is one of those things where I think it's really important. We get used to the go, and we oftentimes think, oh, I'll deal with it after work. I'll deal with it after I make dinner. I'll deal with it after I get the kids to bed. I'll deal with it tomorrow. And if you don't if you have something that absolutely you need to take time for, take that mental health day, because otherwise you're not going to have the time or the space to actually work through those things. And it's something I'm trying to learn how to do myself.
How about you, Marco? You got any tips for us?
Well, I'll give you some of my grandmother's ancient wisdom.
I love grandmother's.
She said, if you want to be a good person, you have to do a good deed every day, no matter how small it is. So try doing that.
I love that. I'm going to say eat some chicken or eat some eggs, and then go and listen to Audio Pong, the podcast you can find on Spotify and Apple and anywhere else you find your favorite podcast. And now you can find Marco here on Public Access America.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope we can do this again. I look forward to the next one.
Definitely. Absolutely. We're going to bring in different perspectives and have these conversations all over again. That's what I love doing.
It's fantastic.
There you go.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for being here, Marco. I appreciate it. Can I tell you a secret?
Yeah.
I thought you were Zach the whole time.
You did call me Zach